Hey everyone, this is Dennis Grady, and today we're going to be learning with Dorie Clark. Dorie is a thought leader, a writer, and an educator who can help you not only reinvent yourself and build a personal brand, but also to help you stand out and to build a following in our world, which, as you know, is becoming more and more crowded with competing talent every day. And Dorie's worked with clients including Google, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, and Yale University, amongst others. She's a regular contributor on Forbes and the Harvard Business Review, as well as Entrepreneur Magazine. And she also, apparently in her free time, teaches at Duke University's School of Business, IE Business School in Spain, HEC in Paris, and the University of North Carolina School of Business, amongst others. And today we're going to be learning a few key points that she wrote about in her two recent books, Stand Out, which came out this year, and a previous book called Reinventing You, which was a Harvard Business Review Press book that came out in 2013. So we hope you enjoy this interview, and we're going to do something a little bit different here. If you have any questions for Dorie, send them my way, whether you follow us on Twitter or you have my email, or you can ping me on LinkedIn or wherever else. Send me your questions, and I will try and go back to Dorie and get them answered. And she's awesome. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer a few follow-on questions from this interview, and then we'll get that back out to you. So enjoy, and and here we go.
Yes. Well, listen, I'm excited to have you on. Some really interesting books that are very much in line with the topics that we talk about with regard to personal branding and standing out, and very relevant stuff. So really interested to get some more insights from you. And I want to start out and ask you, what has changed in the world economy that's making this a vital topic for people? Or maybe it's not already, maybe the change hasn't happened completely already and it's continuing, but what's happening in the world that's making this sort of thing just so important to people right now?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors at play. I mean, the first one, which probably started about 25 years ago now, is just the death knell of lifetime employment, at least in the United States. It's dying in Europe too, but more slowly. People really, for a couple of generations had the viewpoint that they would basically spend their careers at the same company, and that utterly changed. We had mass layoffs in the early 90s, and people realized, okay, I've got to take control of and responsibility for my own career. So I think that began orienting people toward this idea that change was not a failure. It was not a bad thing. Sometimes, whether we want it to happen or not, it's going to happen. But it also can be, if handled right, a proactive opportunity. I think that was the first piece. And then the second piece, of course, let's say 5 to 10 years later, so within the past 10 to 15 years, was the emergence and rise of the internet, which now enables us to do business more globally, to spread our brand globally, and to really start communicating in a way sans gatekeepers that can be empowering if you seize the opportunity correctly.
Yeah. That's interesting. I feel like the internet has also made it almost more difficult to be that employee for the rest of your life, right? I mean, there's just a lot of jobs that people can outsource, or they can leverage labor markets all over the world, essentially, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a result, there's a new imperative for people, because it used to be perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable to be, the best web designer in your town, or
Right.
the best web designer, or the best florist in your neighborhood, or the best whatever, the best marketing person in your company. Those things are still good. Those things are still valuable, but increasingly your competition is not just other web designers in your neighborhood, it's people all around the world. And so you have to get really crisp with what your value proposition is, and explaining to people why they should pay more money to work with you. Because if you are listening to this in a developed economy, you are always going to be more expensive than someone else, and you have to have a darn good reason why.
Yeah. So now I understand that your journey to where you are now as a writer and putting these books out started with you getting laid off. Is that right? And I'm interested to hear about your experience when that happened, and what was your initial reaction? Was it like, nope, I'm going to change, or did it take you a little while to sort of start moving towards this this idea of rebranding yourself and reinventing yourself?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was not quick on the bandwagon. I mean, one of my strengths, you could say, but probably a weakness, is that I am never the first person on the new thing. When somebody, I was at South by Southwest, and oh, everybody's doing Meerkat and whatever, and I mean, sometimes these things play out, right? Sometimes if you're the first person on Twitter and Twitter explodes, then all of a sudden you have 1 million followers. That's fantastic. If you're the first person on Meerkat, that's a lot less exciting, because even among the small universe of people that are doing internet streaming services, because Twitter cut off Meerkat and bought Periscope, now Periscope seems to be gaining momentum, and Meerkat is kind of not tanking maybe, but not getting much traction comparatively. For me, I like to stay out of it. I like to wait until things shake out. I am often a little bit of a laggard when it comes to predicting the future. And so for me, I was like, well, geez, I need another journalism job. And that was what I wanted, and that was what I was looking for. It was only when I absolutely could not find another journalism job that I turned to other alternatives, rather reluctantly. But also, reluctantly, I became a convert, and I realized that it really was necessary for people to get with the program about this. And I have a lot of empathy, because I probably would not have gotten with the program or wanted to do so if I hadn't been forced to. But the experience of being laid off very early in my career really opened my eyes.
Yeah, yeah. So that this was pretty early in your career, and I think that's an important point for everybody, that this isn't just something, this sort of reinvention and branding oneself in their career is not just about an executive level. It's not just an executive level thing. Do you agree that this is something that's applicable at every level of someone's career?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. A couple of years ago, I gave a lecture at Harvard Business School, and it was funny because there was a woman who was also lecturing that day. She was speaking before me. She's a very accomplished woman. There had been a case study written about her that she was talking about. She was a board member of multiple organizations, really high-powered woman, probably in her late 50s or early 60s. And she was saying to me after my remarks, she said, she's like, I don't know. She said, I know I need a personal brand. I know I need to be thinking about these things, but I'm not so sure about these, young kids wanting to have personal brands. I just want somebody who's going to work hard and devote themselves to the company, devote themselves to working hard for me as their boss. I feel like this personal brand stuff is a little bit of a distraction. And I thought, yeah, you know what? That's really interesting. And that is a great mindset for 20 or 30 years ago. But if you are that person, if you are 23 years old and you put all your eggs in the basket of working hard for one company and one boss, and then they give you the pink slip with absolutely no notice, the way they did to me, you are screwed. And I don't want anyone else to be in that position. It's not like people care. I got 1 week's pay when I got laid off. I mean, not even. I had worked the day. I'd worked Monday, so I got 4 days pay, and they're like, "Okay, bye. You're done now." And I got laid off. It turned out right before September 11th, 2001,
Oh, wow.
And the economy froze, and I
Yeah.
couldn't find anything. And I was not their problem anymore. I don't want any other person to be in that place where they have just invested and done what they were supposed to do and just work hard for your nice boss, and your nice boss will take care of you. That is a losing proposition. If you don't take the time to develop your personal brand so that other people besides this one person knows that you're any good, it is very risky. I mean, we recognize when it comes to personal finance that you shouldn't put all of your savings in one stock. That's sort of a stupid idea. That's why people have index funds or mutual funds. You want to spread out your risk. And yet, people who are employees have tons of risk because they work for one company, and that risk is magnified even more if only one person in the company even knows that you're any good.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with what you're saying, 100%. And I think for that person that you were talking to, at the end of the day, people have a brand in a way, whether they want to or not, whether they're thinking about it or not. And I think these, what you write about and what you talk about is really to help people recognize that and to take control of it, right? And say, well, I'm not going to let this person or that person sort of determine what my brand is based on whatever my behavior was or whatever, this, that, and the other thing, but to take control of it and then sort of, fit into that in a way. So the two books that you've written now, the first one was Reinventing You, Define Your Brand and Imagine Your Future. And then the new one is Standing Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Building a Following Around It. I want to talk a little bit, and we kind of are already talking a little bit about the Reinventing You, because I think the branding topic is really important, and it sort of plays into, the new book about standing out. But as far as a personal brand, what do you recommend people do, to sort of help define what that brand is or what that brand should be?
So when it comes to ascertaining your personal brand and really beginning to take control of it, I would say there's a couple of steps. The first one, always a worthy starting place, but something that people often overlook, is the importance of getting feedback from other people about what your brand is today. Because as you said, Dennis, we all have brands. We all stand for something. We're all known for something. And yet, as human beings, we have blind spots, and it's very hard to know what that is. So something, really simple, but yet a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people are maybe nervous to do it, is to just ask people to, an exercise that I prescribe in Reinventing You is to go to about half a dozen friends or colleagues, maybe over a week-long period, and just ask them a really simple question. If you had only 3 words to describe me, what would they be? And clearly it's not a hard question for people to answer. They can answer it in a minute, but it's very useful information because it tells you something critical, which is when people think about you, what is the most important, the most salient thing? So I think that's really important. The second thing, of course, is that then once you get a grip on what your brand currently is, you need to begin to see, well, is that what I want to be? Or, as is the case with most people, do you feel like there's some tweaks that you need to make? Do you want to emphasize certain areas or push a little bit more? Particularly if you're interested in a kind of reinvention where you're moving up the professional ladder, into more strategic roles, into more leadership roles, you may want to buff up those elements of your brand resume, as it were. And so you want to start thinking about, all right, what are the activities that I could undertake in order to get people to see me as a more strategic thinker? What, committees could I chair? What think pieces could I write, etc.?
Yeah. I think that's excellent. How much do you think that, the market or the economy should play into that? So, sometimes, and I have a background in financial services, and in that world, you could be in a, focused on a particular region or really, known for expertise in a particular region or a particular product, and suddenly that product goes away or that region is just not interesting anymore. How much should people be thinking about, one, where things are now, and two, kind of looking at those articles about, what are the hot jobs in the future, and what does the future look like? Those sorts of things.
Well, I mean, I think it's of course useful to be aware of broader external trends, but I also think we shouldn't rely on them too closely.
Dorie, one of the things that you talk about too, which I like, is not being identified by who you work for, but who you are, and just sort of differentiating that. Because I know, just so often, and I see it all the time in my experience, just people just identify themselves by, the company that they work for. And a lot of times it actually, it really does help them brand themselves, but not everybody's had the opportunity or the background to go work for, Goldman Sachs or Google or something like that. Tell me more about that. What do how does that apply?
Well, I think when it comes to personal branding, I mean, you're absolutely right. A lot of people, because they're not putting a lot of thought into it, the default is, here's my job title, or here's the company that I work for, and that just becomes the source of your identity. And again, fine, okay, great, that can and should be a piece of it, but if that's your everything, you run into real problems if something happens with the company. If you ever need, if you ever lose your job, God forbid, or there's some kind of challenge. I mean, you think about the poor people. Arthur Andersen was a great brand. That was one of the most august brands. You have all kinds of people doing really amazing work, and then Enron happens, and if your whole life is, oh yeah, I'm Mr. Arthur Andersen, then your brand has gone up in smoke through absolutely no fault of your own. So I like to encourage people to, if they're an employee, to make their company a piece of their brand for sure, but not necessarily the totality of it. And so you need to begin to think of it almost like, like a Venn diagram with these overlapping circles. And so, one piece is your company and what it's known for, what its brand is in the marketplace. And you share many of those characteristics. I mean, in fact, it's important for you to share characteristics with it, because if you don't, then people will be wondering, why do you work for that company? That doesn't make any sense. Right. So, if your company is known as being respectable and trustworthy, it's important to cultivate that. If your company is known as being hip and creative, okay, great, do that. But make sure you're doing other things too. Make sure, to the extent that it is possible and permissible, that you are networking outside your company, so that you know people and have options and information and opportunities. Make sure that you are trying to build your brand outside your company, whether it's taking on a leadership role in a professional organization or giving speeches at conferences or things like that.
Yeah. I think that's a huge point, especially in financial services, when we've seen major companies just go away completely. And really well-known companies, really very strong companies, just go away. And if they go away, suddenly your brand goes away. So I think that's a really important point. The last thing I want to talk to you a bit about before we move on to and talk a little bit more about Stand Out, the new book, is skeptics. You make a point about skeptics, and what happens when you say, okay, I'm going to reinvent myself, and this is my brand, this is what I want my brand to be, and someone who's maybe close to you or that knows you says, no, it's not. Like, how do you recommend people deal with that kind of situation?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I would say to that. The first one is this is where content creation can become really important for you, because you want to be able, to the best extent possible, to create proof for this other person that you really are serious about what you're doing and you know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So if someone says, oh, come on, what do you know about being an executive coach? Or what do you know about marketing? You've always done HR or whatever it is. If you're able to create, let's say blog posts or videos or whatever, and show people, this is how I think about this. Yes, I'm familiar with the issues that people are talking about. I have my own take on it. I've really taken the time to create something of value here. That is powerful and important. And it serves as kind of a wake-up call for them, so that they have to listen and say, oh, gosh, I guess she really has put in a lot of time on this. So that's really important. The other thing is, honestly, depending on the strength of your relationship with a person, sometimes it's actually good to push right back. And, I am not at all averse to people, they think they're being helpful, right? I mean, most people are not trying to be malicious and be like, oh no, actually you're an idiot, you can't do that. They think they're being helpful because, they want to be the devil's advocate, and they want to, raise your awareness of things you might not have thought about or whatever. Right. But the truth is, it's not helpful. You probably have thought of most things. And if you really wanted their advice in this capacity, you'd probably be asking for it. What happens though is that if you're saying, oh, here's what I want to do, and then they poo-poo it, that's where it becomes difficult. And so what I would actually suggest is going to them and saying, look, appreciate your concern, but that's actually not what I need from you right now. I really have thought about this. I really have done my due diligence, and here's what I did. I need you to support me as a friend. And so, thank you, but I need something different from you. And for a lot of people, that's going to serve to snap them out of it and get them back in your corner. Yeah. You can't do that with everybody, but depending on what your relationship is, sometimes that can be a helpful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good way to help to start sort of reinforcing your brand and sort of working at it too. And as you go through that process of trying to change someone's mind about you. So I want to shift over and talk a little bit about Standout, which is about coming up with this breakthrough idea and then creating, building a following around it, which I think, in this case is in my world perspective, applies a bit more to, the startups of the world and which is, in some ways you are a startup if you're reinventing yourself, but, how are these two topics, from your perspective, related? Did one sort of flow into the next one, or are they just, from your perspective, are they just totally different, or how are these things connected?
No, I definitely see them as connected. The way that I ended up transitioning from Reinventing You to Stand Out was that in my mind they are pretty sequential. Reinventing You is about finding the career and the job that you want. It's about kind of making a transition into the place where you feel like, oh, this is it. I've found where I want to be. And then Stand Out is about what you do once you're there. We live in a very crowded, noisy environment. Everybody's trying to get your attention. And so once you're in a place, particularly if you have newly arrived there, you're just starting at a company or you're just starting in a field, there may be people who have more experience than you do. What do you do then? How do you stand out of the crowd? How do you begin to take the steps necessary to make your mark and get recognized for your true talent and expertise? And so that is why I wrote Stand Out.
Yeah, I think that's great. What do you recommend as being and I know you've got a couple of suggestions in the book, but for you, what's the number one way of coming up with this breakthrough idea, the sort of ideation process?
Yeah, there's a lot of cool possibilities, and as you mentioned in Standout, I identify 5 major strategies that top thought leaders have come up with. But one that I'll mention, which has been very effective for a lot of people, is what I call mixing disciplines. And the basic idea behind this is that innovation very rarely comes from the center of a field. It very rarely comes from people who have just been doing the same thing all along. And that's because you get so steeped in a particular ideology or a particular way of seeing the world, it becomes very hard to see any different way of doing it. Whereas if you were able to mix and match between different disciplines, sometimes something becomes really clear that wasn't before, because you say, well, wait, we can do this in math. Why can't we do this in biology? And you look into it and it's like, oh, actually we can do this in biology. And that's how you can begin to make a lot of progress. And so what I encourage people to do is to really start thinking about the ways that they are different from other people in their field. Because it's in those differences that you begin to be able to see things differently. You can ask different questions. And in fact, one of the things that I've developed that I'll just mention for your listeners is I have a free 42-page workbook that I developed that is actually a series of 139 self-assessment questions that people can walk themselves through to try to draw out these questions of how they can develop their own breakthrough idea. And folks can download that for free on my website, which is dorieclark.com, DORIECLARK.
I'm gonna do that.
Nice. Hope you like it.
Yeah, as you were talking about that and thinking about how I like that perspective about how are you different from other people in your field, because the other point you were making about just sort of mixing and matching industries, I think that helps people to become more curious. And in my experience with recruitment and career and that's something that a lot of companies look for in candidates is just, a level of curiosity is really important. And I think if you start thinking of things that way, it initiates curiosity in your, in that person. You also made a point in the book, you actually related it to a blog posting recently about how, that the idea of internships should not just be for, people coming out of school, and that there's a much bigger use to it. What brought you on to that? What's the sort of proof behind that? What how do you how can this be applied to people someone like me who's, quite a few years out of college.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, certainly the conventional wisdom is that when you're in college, that's the time for internships. You have whole university career services centers devoted to this, to helping kids get internships. And so, the way people think about it is, oh, well, that's great. You make some connections, and then you can get your first job, and then you're all set from there. But it is really kind of an antiquated idea. The idea that, like, oh, you just, you learn, all you need to learn from 18 to 22, and then, fine, you can just go off and do whatever. Because many people do want to reinvent themselves. Many people do want careers that have different skills, or they just want new challenges. I think that internships, with the kind of hands-on tactical experience that they provide, can be a valuable tool for just about anybody. And so one person that I actually profile and stand out is a guy named Tim Walker. He's 35 years old. He actually, the reason he had time on his hands was that he had created a design firm and sold it. So, he was somebody who clearly had been successful. But he saw that Seth Godin, the marketing writer who was a hero of his, had posted that he was looking for interns. And Tim said, okay, that would be amazing. And so, even though he was, 10 plus years out of school, he thought that was something that sounded really cool. And he just dove in and decided to do it. And it became this fantastic experience for him, where he really felt like he was able to learn a ton from somebody that he had always respected and admired.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would take an internship with Seth Godin.
There we go.
And in Stand Out, the second part is, the first section is about, coming up with this breakthrough idea. The second part is about building a following around it. And again, there's a lot of ideas and approaches in the book, but, from your perspective, what's worked best for you? What's been what's helped you build the most following?
So for me, I've really tried to double down on the areas of strengths for me. And so, we started the conversation by talking about my past as a journalist. I was a print reporter. And so I still have sort of that piece of myself, even though I was foiled and lost my job. So now, ironically, I actually do very repertorial-esque things on a daily basis. I blog quite frequently, probably 10 plus times a month. And I do that partly because it's fun for me, partly because it's relatively easy for me, perhaps compared to other people. I can write pretty fast. During my time, my short-lived stint as a journalist, I learned to write very fast and on deadlines. So because of that, that's the form that I take with it. So I've tried to write for a lot of places. I did hundreds of posts for Forbes over the past few years. I write pretty regularly for Entrepreneur, for the Harvard Business Review, for Time. So I use those venues as a way of getting eyeballs, getting noticed by people. But I really advise people to play to their strengths based on what they think would work best for them.
Yeah. You did post recently about, changing your perspective on failure. I'm interested in your perspective on failure, just because it's something that applies to career, and maybe this brand that you go after just sort of blows up, or it doesn't work out, or the breakthrough ideas may just sort of peter out. But what's your perspective on that? Like, what's your definition of failure, and how do you handle it? If you've had to.
Yeah. Well, I guess, as with everything, it sort of depends on your definition of failure. Right. I would say that, my definition is that it's impossible for something to be a permanent failure if you learn from it, and if it helps you move to the next thing. I would say that there are plenty of short-term failures. It was a short-term failure that I didn't get into the doctoral programs I wanted to when I was, when I was fresh out of my master's degree. It was a failure that I got laid off from my reporting job. It was a failure that I worked on these political campaigns that I had hoped would turn into like jobs for a candidate, and then all my candidates lost. Right. So, I don't think that, I think it's always important, of course, to distinguish, like, that narrow thing might have been a failure, it didn't necessarily make me a failure. So they were able to be converted into valuable learnings and valuable future things that I was able to do. But I think these days something that I think is really positive is that people are more willing to talk about them. I mean, no one should be presenting themselves as invincible, that it's just this straight march to success. I mean, I've written 2 books now, Reinventing You and Stand Out, and I'm proud of them. But they were not the first books I tried to write. I wrote 3 different book proposals that all got rejected before by everybody, before I was able to publish those books. And I think it's in knowing that, that when people are able to achieve eventual success, I think it's really helpful for other people and for the discourse in general, for people to understand, it wasn't just that they're like totally different than me and success was just easy for them. It's that, no, I got to write a book eventually, but for a long time, it looked like I wasn't going to get to write a book.
Yeah. I think you also made a point about that you had, when you were trying to get out there as a writer and do posts for other companies, that you tried to do, so you reached out to the editors of like 27 or like 20 something number of places, and they all turned you down and then Forbes picked you up, which thank God you just kept trying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is embarrassing and infuriating, in fact, when you're reaching out to that many people and being like, hey, can I write for you for free? And they're all like, talk to the hand.
Well, one last question, and then we'll wrap up, because I know you've got to cut off here, and just people like yourself who are thinkers and researchers and writers and thinking about the bigger picture and how all this stuff applies to it. I always like to just ask them about their perspective of the future and where things are headed. What is your view, and what should people be doing? Whether they're coming out of school right now or they're 10 years into their career, what types of things should they be learning about, thinking about, looking at to set themselves up for success in the future?
Such a great question. I think that things that you can never start doing too early, one is creating content so that you have a really good paper trail on the internet, so that people can find you, they've heard of you. The most powerful asset you can have is people being familiar with your name. Yeah, I've heard of you. Yeah, sure, I'd like to interview you. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you. That's really powerful. Also, developing the attitude that, in building networks, you always want to start thinking about how you can help other people. And a lot of people, when they're starting out, they don't know how to help people because they feel like they don't have any assets. They feel, well, I can't hire, I don't have a job, so I can't hire somebody for a job. I don't have a lot of money, so I can't give people money. I don't know a lot of people, so I can't connect people. You know what? Deal with it. If you can solve this problem, which is not an easy problem to solve, but if you can crack the code and figure out how nonetheless you can help people, then that is the test that you have to pass. And if you pass that, you are going to be enormously successful. Because even if you have no money, even if you have no experience, you know what? Maybe you know how to salsa dance, and maybe there's someone really powerful that wants to learn how to salsa dance, right. And by God, you teach them, and that is how you make your first important connection, and that you go from there. But it's thinking through what is the thing that I can contribute and making sure you do it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I mean, I just think there's so much value in that specific point about what can you do for them as opposed to what they can do for you, and I think that's what turns off a lot of people on networking, because they feel odd going out and they'll be like, oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And just turning it around and, hey, how can you help them? So, Dorie, thanks so much for coming on. And I'm sorry we ran a little bit long here. It was excellent to meet you and to talk to you a little bit about your 2 books that are out, and the new one that's out now, Stand Out, coming up with that breakthrough idea and building a following around it. I'm excited to continue to read your posts too. So I've enjoyed them. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks a lot, Dennis. Great to talk to you.
Great. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.